Okay, so I want to try a little experiment.
Okay. How cute. Oh my.
Good evening and welcome to For Your Reference, brought to you by your friendly neighborhood librarians at the University of Tennessee. I am Robin.
I am Paris Wayland.
And I'm Sarah Johnson.
So, Paris, I take your reaction to this to mean that you are a collector or at least a lover of Beanie Babies.
Yeah, it's like you kind of just took my soul from me. My first Beanie Baby, I actually got on my birthday. My mom bought it home for me because she had to work all day, and so it was like my first little birthday gift, and it was like super cute. So they hold like a special place in my heart. I even have like plastic tags all over them, even though I still play with them. So yeah.
That's so nice, Paris. I also used to collect Beanie Babies, but apparently I was like a ruthless kid and just tore that tag right off there and just played with it like a normal toy. It was just like nothing. Like that tag doesn't matter. I don't know what it's doing there. It's in the way.
Nope. You just left all kinds of money on the table there, Sarah.
That's the par for the course.
Yeah, I had some Beanie Babies. I didn't really collect them. I just got the ones I thought were cute, you know. I do kind of collect pins, like these little buttons and stuff. So I got some Snoopy here, for example. My wife and I joke that we do collect stuff. We have a lot of weird stuff in the backyard that we've sort of dug up in landscaping changes over the years. And probably the best example is this creepy figure that Holly dug up out of the front yard.
Oh my goodness. Nope. That's how people die. I'm moving out. I'm out. Nope.
I'm sorry. Is this thing still in your house?
It's actually in the backyard. It's sort of become part of the artwork right now, and the yard art. I don't know if it was better or worse in situ, like where Holly actually found it. I think we have a picture of that as well.
I'm glad you didn't find it. I mean, it's all on Holly. So
it's all on Holly now. I can't imagine coming across that though, just peeling back kudzu and then being like, "Oh God, what is that?"
I would immediately covered it back up and walked away.
Nope, didn't see it.
All right. So tonight we're going way further back in history than Beanie Babies, but we are going to talk about figurines. And hopefully our special guest can give me some advice on whether to invite an exorcist or other such professional over to deal with our creepy statue. This is Reviewer 2. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to our first guest tonight, who is a professor of religious studies at the University of Tennessee. Welcome to the show, Dr. Erin Darby.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You joked about the exorcist thing, but in Mesopotamia, some of the folks who are ritual specialists who use figurines are called apkalu, and one translation of that is exorcist, just so you know.
I like it. So tell us a little bit about you and your work.
So I've been a professor at the university since 2011. I was a lecturer first, and then I was hired on the tenure track in religious studies. I'm an archaeologist, but I'm also a specialist in ancient Hebrew literature, and I teach all sorts of classes for the department in early Judaism, Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, archaeology in the Bible, and then I teach a bunch of modern classes too, like religion in the workplace. I'm also, fun fact, the faculty director of undergraduate research and fellowships with Andrew Seidler over in student success. And I do a bunch of work with diversity and engagement. So I pop here and there all over the place across campus.
So you don't have a lot going on at all?
No, I am so bored. Nothing going on.
All right, well, let's see if we can get somebody who actually has some stuff going on. In the role of Reviewer 2 tonight, we have Dr. Theo Kopestonsky, Distinguished Lecturer in the Department of Classics at the University of Tennessee. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So it's your turn now. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Well, I actually came to the University of Tennessee at the same time as Erin Darby in 2011, and I'm a distinguished lecturer here. Erin and I actually met in Izmir, Turkey, like 15 years ago or something like that. I also teach, and I'm an archaeologist as well, but in the classics department. So I teach things like Greek and Latin and ancient literature and translation, Greek and Roman texts and things like that. But my love is actually the classical world in Greece. So that's where I study things like ritual practice and figurines and small shrines. And my specialty focuses on the period of like 700 to 200 BCE. So yeah, quite a bit in the distant past.
All right. So I'm excited to listen to you two do your thing tonight. And the question you're going to be talking around is this: how do figurines challenge what we think we know about ancient religion and the lives of everyday people? So, reminder to everybody out there, if you're in the audience and you have questions, you can drop them in the comment section on YouTube or Facebook, and we can surface them during the Q&A. When my face reappears on the screen, Erin and Theo, that is your cue to bring it in for Landon, and we'll be about ready to start the Q&A. Doctors, take it away.
All right. Well, I'm going to get us started here and ask Erin, before we get into the nitty gritty of scholarship, can you tell me what's the point of figurines? I mean, why even bother studying these things? I mean, we already learned that they're kind of creepy at some times. So why study them?
It's a good question, Theo. And I'll tell you that part of it plays into my anti-authoritarian personality. And the answer is, in my field, I thought people were writing about figurines all the time, but doing it really poorly. And now my figurines are females. They are primarily heads with breasts and then a pillar body. And so that turns out invites a lot of speculation about what they're for, why they're in ancient Israel. People try and connect them to the Bible. That doesn't work particularly well. So I actually got interested in figurines because of all of the sometimes serious, sometimes ridiculous scholarly interpretations and popular interpretations of My Little Ladies. And, you know, some of the more ridiculous ones, at one point, a very prominent archaeologist who will remain nameless excavated some figurines and took them to a gynecologist because he was worried they had sexually transmitted diseases because of the shape of the anatomy. So it varies from there how people respond to these, but I think our responses to the figurines tell us a lot more about ourselves than they sometimes tell us about the past. So I wanted to know, first of all, how do we get to the bottom of that problem? And then if we were trying to interpret something about the past, what could the figurines actually tell us? So I guess it grows out of my need to punch back a little bit at the scholarly world, especially some of the more comical interpretations of my corpus. What about you?
Well, we have a different situation in the classical world and the Greek world. I'm kind of impressed that they even cared about them, because for the longest time, no one cared at all about the figurines in the Greek world, unless they were Tanagra figurines, which are focused on fashion. And those were found in the 19th century, and they influenced fashion. They have those women have these beautiful hats and a fan, and they're all decked out in clothes. But otherwise, people just ignored them. They were like, well, why study something that's mold made, that's being repeated over and over again, or something that's handmade? I mean, it's not the aesthetic, because we have a big issue with the aesthetics and people being really interested in sculpture. So people really ignored them or just focused on them stylistically for so long. And it really wasn't until about 50 years ago that anyone really cared or was publishing on them in anything beyond just a sort of stylistic way. So we had a sort of situation where they were ignored for a long time. And I feel like I'm constantly being figurines are really important. They're interesting. And I think at a basic level, when you have a figurine, they evoke a response, because you'll see some figurines that I'll have them shown, and that basically they show things of the daily life. They show people. And whenever you have them out, people want to touch them. And so they evoke a response. And because they evoke a response, I think that they've been, ignored for a while in a way that I don't really understand, but I can say that they're being studied now.
Yeah. No, and I think we have totally opposite problems because you have a wealth of art objects from your period, and we have a paucity of art objects from my location and period. So people really like the idea that is some sort of pictorial image coming from ancient Israel. It's not mentioned in the Bible. And so then there's a lot of speculation, whereas you all have so much material. I
Yeah.
think it would be easy to prioritize stone or other kind or pottery rather than the figurines.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. But I have to say that, you know, there's a lot of us who are pushing them and talking about them now. So it's a little bit better, for sure.
It's a lot better. When I first met you in Izmir, I was an interloper, right? This was a conference entirely on classical corpora, pretty much. And I was one of the lone sort of ancient Near Easternists learning about how folks in classical archaeology approach figurines. So, yeah.
Well, welcome. We love you too. We'll welcome anyone who wants to study figurines now. But I think, Erin, let's actually focus on the question that they asked us to talk about. So how do figurines challenge what we think we know about ancient religion and the lives of everyday people?
Well, in my context, again, because there's this push and pull between the biblical record of what happened in ancient Israel and what archaeologists actually excavate, it challenges quite a lot of our suppositions that if your suppositions were based only on the biblical record. So if you assume that ancient Israelites didn't make any images at all, what do you do when everywhere you excavate in the 8th through the 6th centuries BCE, you're excavating figurines? And I work on anthropomorphic, human-shaped figurines, but there are zoomorphic, animal figurines as well. So if you read only the Bible, you may get this impression that you can't make any images whatsoever. But when you excavate regular people's houses, what you find is that there are images all over the place. And so that's one, I think, difference of perception. I also think this is something you work on too, Theo. For a long time, people approached the figurines when they talked about them just as images rather than as the end result of a ritual that's much bigger than the figurine itself. And so using figurines to talk as much as we can, where we can, about the rituals in which figurines were used, I think gives you such a rich and more interesting picture of everyday religious activities. So mine are mostly in domestic units. And while it's really hard to go from where I excavated a fragment to reconstructing a ritual, what we do know from ritual texts in the ancient world in my periods are that figurine rituals were really complicated, that they involved all sorts of steps. Sometimes they involved even offerings, that the figurines represented are often not the thing that you pray to. So in Mesopotamia, where you have ritual tablets with figurines, different type of figurine, but still, the prayers are to the main deities of the pantheon, and the figurines represent lower level or intermediary entities. So if you know, because we don't have a lot of data in ancient Israel, and you dig up this figurine, you may assume it's a prime goddess or it's the thing that a person was praying to. But the data from the Near East indicates that you can't make that assumption. It's very likely that that's some sort of apotropaic or protective symbol. Maybe it's some sort of spiritual entity that is being used to exorcise evil or sickness out of a house and guard against its return, which ultimately leads us to know that everyday people's lives that were ritual lives were just as complicated as our ritual lives, which I think we should have known to begin with. But when we look at the past, I think sometimes we draw a picture of it that's too simple. Like we stand at this distance, right? And so we homogenize everything into a simple narrative. When we think about it, of course, it's not so simple.
Definitely. I didn't realize that they had a potential for such a different sort of role, because ours are so much more all over the place. We have them in burials, we have them in houses, we have them at sanctuaries, we have them in stray finds, and we have them also in production centers. We have workshops that they survive, but then we also have them in workshops in shrines right next door where we can't even tell the lines of the shrine. So we have them as just, they're integrated in the lives of the ancient Greeks in such a way that is, it's it's kind of overwhelming in some ways, because when you find them, I usually say the way that we start to really talk about this when we see them in numbers. So you're talking about numbers that are much smaller than mine, but if I see 1 or 2, I'm not usually that excited about it because it doesn't tell me that much. For me, it's about where we start to see concentrations and context of them. So for me, seeing, in fact, when you find a large number of them, anywhere from, like at my shrine at Kopestonsky, which is a little shrine to the nymphs in Corinth, there's 250 that were in a deposit. And so 250 is like, okay, that tells us a little something. Let's talk about the types. But we're also talking about places like the Carishian Cave, which is a cave near Delphi that has over 50,000 figurines. Or if you go to the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore, which is a larger sanctuary, which we have 24,000. So we see them much more in numbers, but at the same time, you can have some really interesting debates about, an individual piece that's really interesting, like, someone baking bread, or what might look to be a small shrine representation. So you can see here, we've got some dancing figures, and we have a standard standing female type who's holding a bird and a piece of fruit. And then we have like handmade figures like birds and my favorite little mouse down there below. So you have these sort of figures that can be both very specific to a shrine, such as those dancing groups, which suggest to us nymphs, or they can be something so common like that standing female figure that's in the background, that those figures are found all over the Greek world. And when I say the Greek world, I don't mean Greece. I mean all of the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. And that type is less evocative because it's standard and it's mold made. So dealing with those sort of issues, for me, it's about numbers sometimes, which is kind of funny because I'm not a numbers person. But if you start to see something again and again repeated, and there's a lot of them, that we start to see as significant. But then you have to determine, are we looking at a workshop? Are we looking at a sanctuary? Why are they there? So that's kind of what we have to, it's about making sense of the choices that people are making.
And that mass production piece is a clear distinction, right? Because my figurines, the stylistic features of them, they only appear within the polity of ancient Judah. So that's the Southern Kingdom, if you're thinking of biblical history. They don't appear outside of that much at all. Whereas Theo, you could have a Demeter and Kore from anywhere across the Greek world. And I think that's a really interesting distinction, that our production industries operate and are organized slightly differently in the two periods.
Definitely. I mean, I think I just wanted to point one thing about those standing females. So every single polis, if they're making terracottas, has their own version of that. And they're both using it internally in their own city and also exporting it. So you can find not only a standing figure of your place, but an imported one elsewhere. Right. So how do you deal with those kind of distinctions?
And we don't have, we don't have imported figurines much in Judah, and we don't export them much out of Judah. So there's a whole set of questions that have to do with who's responsible for the production lines, and is it controlled from the top down by the state, or is the stylistic continuity at different cities, but only within Judah, somehow a grassroots movement? So we use all sorts of tools to do that. And I think you all use the same. We will take slices out of a figurine through petrographic study and look at the makeup of the clay. And then that can tell us a little bit about where the clay came from, and was it local or was it imported? But we have to get down to that level of analysis, because we don't have figurine workshops that anyone's excavated. So we have to go from the objects and what we can learn about the objects and their clay and the tempering agents that were added to infer something about production. Whereas at Corinth, you have quite the opposite situation. You have a wealth of information.
Yeah, we have a potter's quarter where they're actually making the figurines, and we have molds where we can actually put the figurines that we find back in the molds. So we have a full, connection to the production site, and then we can see them being used in the city itself. So what can you tell us about the figurines? What does it tell us about the people who are making them? Because we're kind of pushing to this, like the craftsmen, but also the consumers and the production and all of that.
Right. It's and so in my field, again, because my corpus is predominantly female, the presumption had been that they were made by women, or only by women, that they were made kind of on an ad hoc basis in someone's home when something came up, or that they were used only by women for concerns we somehow assumed would only be women's concerns. And what we find when we look at all the data is that we have actually full-blown production industries that are complicated, probably entire families are incorporated into the production of these things. And there's lots of complicated reasons we won't get into here for why we think that. Some of them have to do with the makeup of the clay and the similarities to other kinds of clay items we find in ancient Judah, like pottery. So it's probably more complicated than simply aligning a style of a figurine to a gender of a maker or a gender of a user. And we've got lots of ritual texts from the Near East that indicate that even if you did have a problem with infant mortality or death in the family, that would be a concern maybe the entire family engaged in, including the woman, yes, but not only the woman. So it's really hard to go from a figurine to the population that used it and use only the iconography, in my case, to make that assumption. And partly because it's not in shrines. We don't have inscriptions. They're in houses where all sorts of people live. Nuclear families live there. Sometimes seasonal laborers move in and they live there. Sometimes you've got a joint workspace where people from different houses get together and work there. I think that when you're talking about domestic deposition of figurines like Robin's crazy figurine in her yard, they're mostly trash, right? So they've already been disposed of maybe once, twice, 3 times. And you've got lots of people that live in the space. Whereas in your case, you've got these awesome shrine deposits.
They're pretty amazing, I have to say. I love them. So it's interesting because you're talking about, this emphasis with women. We have a dominance of female figurines as well in the Greek world, but there's far more variety than I think that you guys have in your area. But I think one of the most intriguing things about getting back to the people who are making them are the traces that they leave for us. And so for both my handmade and my mold-made ones, I have fingerprints and large fingerprints. So you can actually see the traces of the human that made them. And you can see them recutting and reusing figurines simply because either for it's easier or because that one's just really special. And so you have this sort of set that there's like this conservatism that they want to repeat things over and over again. And so that tells us a little bit about ritual practice in the Greek world, which is there's sort of a standard, you have to sort of do this, and that it's a standard practice to give a figurine. But one of the things I think is really interesting about figurines generally, at least in my world, is how the range of types is present. And so we have things to tell us about what people are doing in their daily lives. Like there's images of people making bread, sitting at an oven. There's pictures of them. There's one of a man grating cheese. I mean, how more domestic and great can you have with something like that? But then there's also whimsy. So it doesn't have to be all these serious standing females that are being dedicated as sanctuaries. You also have things being dedicated and placed in graves. And my favorite are monkeys. So there's a whole series of monkeys doing silly things that are Corinthian, that we have examples in Corinth from the workshops. And my favorite, of course, is one that's on the bottom, which is a monkey holding a cloth over his head, eating a piece of bread with the pestle in one hand as he's standing on a mortar that's tilted. I mean, how much more whimsical can you get than that? At the same time, they're also producing things like representations of shrines and these very standard figures. So I think that's kind of one of those really fun things that we have with the figurines. So tell us a little bit about personality, I think. I mean, whose idea was it? Let's do a monkey. Monkeys aren't in Greece. They don't live in Greece. Who was like, I want to do a monkey doing these silly things. So I think that's kind of fun.
Also, you're accessible, right? Too, if you're not just interested in what elite people who have money to dedicate statues are doing, if you want to know what regular people or everyday people are doing, figurines are a snapshot into our lives, right? People who are maybe a little bit more along the lines of the average person watching the show or working at the university. And I think that's like, if we write history without those people, we've written, 1% of history. So there's just really not an option to ignore them.
And I also like to think about how many people touched that figurine before it finally was deposited. I mean, you think about the person who made it, then you think about the person who bought it, and then you think about the person who deposited it. And then once it goes into sanctuary, you can't let it leave. So someone has to move it. What if it breaks, but you can't leave? You have to bury it. And then the person finds it. And then we fix it. And then we set, I mean, there's just so many hands that touch these things that it feels like you really are touching a bit of history whenever you're working with figurines.
And some of my colleagues, they'll be frustrated that that so many of our figurines are in disposal contexts, not in the context of use. So it's broken, right? And then it's been used to block up a wall, or they've used it to like push ashes around in a little oven. But I also like to think about the afterlife of figurines after they're broken, right? The little kids who might play with them in the courtyard, or how you might reuse them to level a floor. Mine, they didn't deposit them in a ritual pit and deactivate them. They're just the materia of everyday life. And the biggest contexts in Jerusalem, where I spend a lot of my time thinking about figurines, are they're thrown in to like make construction fills, and we find them in toilets after they're broken. They're the landscape of kind of daily life. And just because they maybe don't play the original role they had when they were made by the coroplast, or when they were acquired by the ritual agents, doesn't mean they had nothing to do after that point, right? They continue all the way till, like you said, we excavate them today. Or Robin excavates, or
a figure that's creepy. Mine are not that creepy. I'm telling you that.
That's about.
Okay, so you haven't found your figures aren't that creepy, but for each of you, do you have a sort of favorite thing, like one favorite thing that you've dug up, or a favorite sort of dig you've been on?
I mean, one that, like, not my own dig.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Geez, that's a hard question, right? Archaeologists, we're pretty psyched out of our mind about pretty much everything, right? So, like, the best thing to find is poop. If you can find an ancient latrine and you can test the soil, you can learn so much about people and parasites and their daily habits and their lives. So
you are special, Erin. You are special. I was gonna say I like my mouse. I like my terracotta mouse.
I like mine.
I like my terracotta mouse with big ears.
Yeah, I think I'll stick with my creepy statue.
All I'm saying is you can't really tell it is fecal matter after so many years. So you can't rule out that your creepy statue was in ancient fecal matter. I'm just saying.
Well, now that just makes it worse.
No, it does. It's kind of making it worse. Well, I will say is one of the most amazing things I think about being an archaeologist and studying these is I work at a place at Corinth, and it's been under excavation for over 100 years. And so you go into the storerooms, and not only do you get to see the material that's been excavated, you also get to see the material and the written explanations and drawings of people who've been and studied the material in the past. So you're here, like my heroes who are studying the material. And so the rewards of going in there and just seeing cabinets, for me, just drawer after drawer after drawer after drawer of figurines that are unique and special, is something that I enjoy. And I think it's such a privilege that I have to be a scholar of this.
Cool. So a question I've always, I don't know that I've always had this question. I was born with this question. The thing I think about is, how, and you sort of touched on it a little bit. How do you're at this dig, and you're pulling all of these artifacts out of the ground. How do you are there certain methods for keeping your own politics and identity and all of your own sort of stuff?
I mean, imperfect
out of
right? The
interpretation. Yeah.
I think, and maybe it's marked more by the effort doing so than it is our success in an absolute way. What is true is you dig what you find, not what you were looking for. And it doesn't matter what you thought was there. You are now responsible for preserving that for not just anyone who comes after you, but anyone with any research question that comes after you. So essentially, you have to document every single thing you excavate with the same level of care and detail and cultural sensitivity to the place where you're working as the primary object. So, if Theo's interested in figurines and she's working in a site in Corinth and she excavates something that's like medieval, she's got just as much an obligation to care for that material as she does her primary research interest. So, archaeologists, we're caretakers, right? And when archaeology is destructive, you can't go back and do it again. When we excavate it, it's gone. So there's a heaviness, a weightiness to playing that role.
And politics does get involved too. I mean, Corinth was, the Nazis came into Corinth during World War II and actually pulled out the the crates where they had the figurines and other material that had been from the early excavations and used the wood for firewood. And so we're left then dealing with the material that was left behind, and it was documented, but we don't have the same level of documentation. And also choices were made when people were excavating about what to keep, what not to keep, what to record. So even though we're saying this is what you should do, sometimes people didn't do it. And so you have that. And then people sometimes make choices about what they're going to excavate and interpret it in different ways. And things a lot with the classical world have been reused and appropriated in ways that are dangerous. And so, yes, you're right. It's a problem. But if you're, trying to do your best and try to keep politics out of it, it's always the best policy.
And then there's museums too, right, Theo? I mean, museums are also a political act, whether or not you keep an object, whether or not you show an object, whether or not you make that object available to the general public. So a lot of my work, I focused more on objects that have come just directly out of the ground, but Theo deals a lot with museum collections and images, and all museums are also political.
It's true.
Right.
Definitely.
So we are nearing the end of our time, but I do have one quick question, and this is for you, Theo. Is there any sort of speculation in the scholarship about how monkeys ended up in Greece of all places?
Well, it's okay. I can answer that. Well, we actually do have monkeys in Minoan frescoes. So in Thera or Akrotiri, we have monkeys on the wall paintings. And so it's not that they didn't know the monkeys. It's just that there were no monkeys in Corinth as far as we have any records for. So it's not like they didn't know. And they are traveling. They're traveling. There's a lot of connection between just the Mediterranean world. It's funny you asked that question because I actually looked it up because I was like, if I mention monkeys, I need to check this. And so originally people thought that they were connected to the monkeys that the Greeks were seeing were from Egypt, but it turns out that perhaps the Minoan monkeys were from India, which are a type from India, which suggests even further contact and exploration and exchange. So I think that's what's going on, is that someone saw a monkey, was like, they're hilarious, I'm going to do a monkey. And then they were like, from then on, they were like, I love it. And I sometimes think they might stand in as like children, it's sort of like, what are children kind of doing? But children aren't really in the iconographic record in the figurines in the same way that you might think. So I think that might be it. And they're really great with animals. I mean, we've got monkeys and dogs and birds and all sorts of fun things. So that's my answer to you, is that it's exchanged in what's going on. So these people aren't isolated. They're in contact with lots of other people in the Mediterranean and even across the land as well.
Cool. Well, I could sit here and chat with you all night, but we have other things to get to. I would like to thank you both so much for being here. And now it's time for us to send you over to Paris Whalen with Check This Out.
Hey everyone, welcome to Check This Out segment. My name is Paris Whalen and I'm the Media Literacy Librarian here at the University of Tennessee. And the Check This Out segment, for those of you who maybe might just be joining us, is a segment where we focus on how to make sense of the topic at hand or something close to that. And we use the resources provided by UT libraries and authoritative sources for the public to pull from. So today we're going to focus on I'm going to talk about the importance of identifying and verifying sources, because origin and context are important contributors to forming the bigger picture, right? So to give the viewers a unique perspective, we have a public-facing librarian. Our guest this episode is Brittany Norwood. Brittany is a Commons librarian at Hodges Librarian, so she hangs out with most of us. You most often see her working at the front desk or providing research assistance, but she also works behind the scenes on different library programs like Women in Horror, which you might have seen at the end of October, and De-Stress for Success, which is coming up after Thanksgiving. She's interested in helping students develop the skills and confidence to be information literate. And in her spare time, she often is caught crafting, reading, or watching movies. So Brittany, thank you for taking the time out to chat with me.
Thank you for inviting me on, Paris.
Yeah. So as we were preparing for the show and we were talking, we discussed how you didn't particularly have like a academic background in religion or studying objects, but I know for a fact you have a love for storytelling and you answer a lot of really odd research questions through the research assistance chat feature. So in fact, you actually told me a story about a conspiracy theorist in their research on the centaur. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's an installation on the first floor of the library, which is the centaur Valos. And our centaurs has a very interesting story that you can revisit in our first season for your reference, episode 2, in the Stories from the Stack segment with Ingrid Ruffin. But in that episode, they interviewed chancellors, Professor Beauvais Lyons, and they discussed the centaur Valos, and he presents the question, do centaurs exist, to kind of create conversation around the blurred lines between reality and imagination. But Beauvais specifically mentions many trappings of authenticity, which he mentions in reference to some shards of potteries that are like surrounding the actual centaur. So I think this conversation about authenticity and the story of like origin of an object kind of leads us right into the story you shared with me. So do you mind just kind of recapping this entire conspirator story and how it reminded you how important it is to check sources?
Oh, the centaur story. So this is something that happened actually earlier this year. And I'm not going to lie, it kind of broke me a little bit. So I'm at the front desk and patron walks up wanting to know more about the library in general. So I'm handing them different literature that we have up front, having a conversation with them about the library. And suddenly they tell me, and by the way, that artifact you have downstairs, it is so amazing that you all have something that proves the existence of such a creature. And my brain immediately stops and assesses the situation and thinks, oh wait, there's not actually a sign down there saying that this is fake. This is made by somebody here at UTK, and this person just saw the do you believe and a decently like made skeleton down there and connected the dots. How do I rectify this situation without embarrassing them? So I'm trying to be really nice, and I'm saying, "Oh no, I'm sorry, sir. There's not really signage down there that explains the story so much about this. This is actually something that we made. It shows a bit about what we are capable of creating. It's a fake artifact, and I swear, this guy, when he looks at me, I see like the tinfoil hat come down over his eyes. And I know that there's no salvaging this conversation at this point. And he clasps his hands and lays them on the desk. And he just looks at me like he is so sad that I don't know the truth. And he goes, well, I read Greek mythology. And I know that they find things over there. So, and once again, at this point, I am broken. There is nothing I can do to bring this conversation back on track. Anything I say at this point, like it's going to go further and further absurd. So I hate to admit that I let him leave believing in centaurs still. But,
well, the installation did its job, It led him to question, do centaurs exist? And so I guess that question is still floating out there. So on the topic of authentic artifacts, I think this is actually a great opportunity to have you tell us a little bit about Scout and how it can kind of aid students in their research of our collection of primary resources.
Yeah, so Scout is actually a really great resource. First of all, I'm not an expert on this particular search engine, but I can definitely tell you some of the basics of it. So Scout will allow you to search what we have in special collections and also some in digital collections to see different artifacts that we have down there. So it can be a bit tricky to use when you first get started with it. And so it could be beneficial at first for you to go to one search, actually, go to the advanced search option and select special collections under search profile. Then you can search using keywords or titles.
Yeah.
And from there, you can find, the exact titles of items that you can then go to the Scout database and search for some of the identifying information that's been cataloged for them. And once you're able to do that, and you find the item in Scout, it'll bring up the item's box number, what collection it's a part of, different things like that, so that you can request the item be brought to you.
Yeah. Super.
And alternatively, you could go directly to Scout and search for the items that we have in either special or digital collections. You have the option to select if you want to. And from there, I find that keyword searching using like one specific term works pretty well. And that will give you a lot of different source types, like archival records themselves or links to entire collections. So, for example, when I was putting together the display for Women in Horror with the items that we had in special collections, something that I did was at first, I just wanted to see if we had anything related to horror down there. So that was my keyword.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought up that we have Raimi's manuscript that became eventually The Evil Dead. It led me to our Pulp Fiction collection, different things like that. And
Awesome.
honestly, if you are wanting to get to know more about Scout, I highly recommend getting in touch with the people who work in special collections.
Yeah.
They're excellent at their job. They have a granular knowledge of the different artifacts that we have hidden back there that maybe your keyword search didn't bring up. And also, they're just really great people.
I completely agree with you. Yeah. Thanks for kind of walking us through that process as well and giving us an example. It's definitely very helpful for people to kind of have an example as we talk through things. So speaking of primary resources, I would definitely be remiss if I didn't bring up UTK's very own McClung Museum of Natural History and Culture, which has a wonderful collection specific to East Tennessee and has amazing exhibits, both permanent and temporary. So you all should check that out if you have a chance. And if you're curious about material culture and how to kind of read an object, consider visiting their website for supporting materials by the curator of academic programs, Katie Malone. Katie basically teaches students how to use primary sources in the form of material culture, art, or natural history specimens, which basically means critically analyzing an object, just as all of us should be seeking context for information that we are consuming, right? So bringing it back to your Centaur story, when you're helping students with questions around, say, conspiracy theories, how do you kind of go about verifying the information that they've maybe provided, if they provide information to you?
So honestly, it depends on the context in which the person is asking this question. So some people are interested in conspiracy theories more as information objects or a cultural phenomenon, as opposed to engaging in truth-seeking behaviors. So the interaction when somebody comes and asks about a conspiracy theory, it typically starts off with me learning more about why they're researching this topic and in the context of what class or what assignment. And honestly, that's pretty par for the course for most research questions we get at research assistants. We want to know why you're researching this thing. That way we can help guide you to the sources that you need. But I do feel that it's especially important to get this information in this particular situation. Once I determine the why, I try to address the question in kind. So for people who are mostly interested in conspiracies as information objects, I show them strategies they can use to find information about how the conspiracies were developed, who might have started it, things like that. But if somebody appears to be quote unquote truth seeking, or they appear to be operating under some sort of mis or disinformation, then I try to encourage them to let the literature be their guide or to speak with a subject expert. Now, this can be a difficult process, and sometimes you might not realize that a person is operating under the assumption that a piece of false information is true until you start trying to research the question yourself. And then you hit either a wall where you can't find anything, or you might hit a slew of varied credible sources that are debunking this person's argument. That's definitely happened to me before when people have come to RA on topics that I'm not super familiar with. And I find out in the process of trying to help them find stuff that they are very wrong. And it's a delicate situation. You have to make sure that you're able to convey what's important in a way that is for lack of a better word, palatable to the person. After all, if I present information in a way that the person won't accept, then it can make them dig in deeper to what they already are inclined to believe. You never want to make a person feel stupid or uneducated. You want to make sure that they understand that, that this was a mistake. And not everyone will listen to you, even if you are as kind as possible. But I feel that the least that we can do is try. So I do try to watch how I approach the situation. But circling back to the language of your original question, I typically don't verify sources for people. That's not often why they chat in. I've had very, very few people actually specifically questioning whether a source is credible or not. And in those cases, it's never been about a conspiracy theory. People who do chat in with this truth-seeking behavior typically already believe their argument and they're wanting to find something validating. That's what makes this sort of interaction so risky and tricky. Personally, I feel like I'm doing the person a disservice if I don't explain to them that I've searched and we don't have credible literature on their topic. And here's what they can do instead. And when it comes to explaining how to actually consider source credibility, I recommend people checking the researcher's sources, the researcher's reputation, and to see if any external factor, like a funding source, may have influenced how the research was presented. And then engage in lateral reading, which is probably one of the most important skills anyone can use in this day and age. So lateral reading is the act of getting off of the page or the article you're examining and searching for that information elsewhere. So say you're reading an article that's claiming the Earth is flat and it lists 5 sources. You don't need to just say, well, they've cited their sources and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, so it must be good. No, instead go to a different search engine, maybe one of our databases, and start researching yourself to see what other people have found, what they might have to say about this research. And remember, even peer-reviewed sources can be fallible. That's why retractions exist. And conveying false information can happen to people who publish with the best of intentions. If you feel strongly about something, someone out there is going to try to use that emotion to convince you of something untrue. It doesn't mean that it's bad to care. It just means we all need to separate ourselves from our own personal feelings when it's time to evaluate the facts. So if you give yourself a period of healthy skepticism and give yourself a period of healthy skepticism to draw your own conclusions. And I always say it's worse if the thing that you feel strongly about and promoted ended up being false or misleading, or was something intended to trick you, because then if you're sharing that information, you're ultimately hurting your own argument.
Yeah, thank you for that very thorough answer and all of those examples. Again, I think they're very helpful. So we stress information literacy and how important it is to critically assess the source of the information or the origin. What resources does the library have that may be useful to someone researching, say, the origin of folktales or even quotes? And I brought this question up specifically because when I work on chat every blue moon, I get this question. It always throws me off because, my background's in like digital arts and like a lot of librarians' background is in English and it feels like it comes so natural for them and I have to search for this.
You see, I was psychology and sociology, so I'm out of left field there. But yeah, we do have several databases that talk about this sort of anthropology, and that could be of interest to people. We have various books in our collection that gather and analyze folktales, urban legends, conspiracy theories, and so on. But honestly, one of my favorite sites for this is still Snopes.com. When we were chatting earlier, I told you a bit about this, but the reason why I feel so strongly about information literacy is because back when I was first starting high school, like somebody shared a story with me about this really spooky spider. And I was convinced the spider was real and it was going to find me and kill me. And Snopes helped get me out of that mentality. And I'm still terrified of spiders, but I know that this one doesn't exist because of them. Honestly, yes, thank God for Snopes. But honestly, I feel like it's an accessible introduction to your topic, and it can help guide you to some of your first sources that can lay the foundation for your argument. And outside of those resources, always feel free to talk with us via chat or email your subject librarian. These are all excellent routes for starting crafting this sort of search strategy, especially if you're wanting to look into the origin of these stories.
Yeah. So with so many fake news sources, satirical papers, and social media basically encouraging rapid sharing of information, what do you think our viewers can do to build their information literacy skills, other than listening on our podcast?
Honestly, one of the best things you can do is test yourself. Find different quizzes or modules that colleges and libraries have published and take them. Attend free webinars. You learn best when you have the chance to make mistakes and even fail. So find an environment in which it's low stakes to do that. If you're wanting help with finding something like this, once again, chat in. Use research assistants. We'll help you find these things. And outside of that, start playing around with different search interfaces and learn a bit about algorithms and how authority is contextual and constructed. When you start to understand that, then you'll start to feel a bit more confident in being able to understand like what information literacy is and how we rate different sources as credible or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Great suggestions for our audience, Brittany. And thanks for sharing your experience with the resources that UT Libraries provides for our community. So that basically wraps up our Check This Out segment for today. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing how you approach information needs. So thanks for hanging with us, Brittany. Viewers, as always, thanks for listening in. We hope that this conversation was informative and you feel empowered to question the media that you are consuming in any form. And that's going to wrap up our session for today. Next, we have Stories from the Stacks with Sarah Johnson.
Evening, everyone. Welcome to Stories from the Stacks. Tonight, I'm going to highlight an item from our Betsy B. Creekmore Special Collections Department that goes hand in hand with our theme tonight, which is exactly what Paris and Brittany were just talking about. And you might be thinking, oh, cool, let's keep learning about figurines and their place in history and information literacy. Well, so maybe not exactly that. I gotta pull you in somehow, don't I? I gotta get you excited. But we are going to take a look at an item from our special collections, which sounds very fancy, doesn't it? Showcasing the religious lives of everyday people and how interpreting these materials is guesswork a lot of the time. So it's still pretty similar to what we're discussing. And we can make educated guesses and try to envision what it was like at the time, but we don't truly know what was going on with any particular person. And I think I'm getting ahead of myself again. I do that a lot because I just get really excited about all of this stuff. So let's take it back. Special collections. What is this? This department acquires, arranges, preserves, and promotes the use of rare and unique materials that supports the information, instruction, and research needs of the University of Tennessee community. AKA Special Collections is like one of the coolest places in the library. But people like me should be thoroughly screened for how many times I've taken a tumble in public before being allowed into a place like this. I'm joking a little bit. Anyone can visit Special Collections. In fact, we highly encourage it. So we are going to take a look at a journal belonging to a British-born artist, Herbert Francis Williams Lyons. That is a hefty name for you. We're going to call him Herbert for short. I really like these people who have the biggest names ever, but Herbert it is. So a little bit about good old Herbert. He was born on January 19th, 1863 in Plymouth, England. And he trained as an artist in Boston, Massachusetts, and Paris, France. And his art is expressed through mediums of oil paint, watercolor, and engravings in wood. And he primarily depicts scenes in religion and mythology, as well as land and seascapes, and describes his subjects of his work as ethereal, spiritual, mystic, and as well as material subjects. Kind of gives you a lay of the land. And in 1922, Herbert was in his late 50s, and he decided to go on an international tour, including Africa, America, Asia, Australia, and other various islands. Can you say bucket list? Like, I'm doing that when I get 50. His international tour is the focal point of this journal, and he entitled it Album of Sketches of the Holy Land, which sounds way fancier than any journal I've ever kept. And he begins this journal with a description detailing the spiritual journey he embarks on through his world exploration. Within the book are 63 pages of impressionistic sketches made with pencil and pen that illustrate scenes of biblical inspiration found from his tour of Palestine, Jerusalem, and Egypt. Many of these sketches are coupled with Bible verses or notes written in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. And as you comb through the pages, you'll see he has scenes of buildings and landscapes. He's seen on his travels, animals he's come across, and portraits of everyday people. And they're beautiful, as you can see. Herbert was an artist, and all artists leave room for interpretation of their work. It comes with the territory. But I find that his personal journal, full of everyday scenery and religious-inspired sketches, creates an opportunity to dive into his personal experiences, which in turn leaves us grasping at straws trying to know the true meaning behind it. While not as influential as the use of figurines in ancient culture, good old Herbert still has added value to the understanding of religious experiences of everyday people. And in the instance of this particular journal, a personal journal, it isn't ambiguity kind of the point though? But that's okay. So even though I do not study myself, I do not study material culture or religious lives of people in history, I can still be inspired by their commitment and their experiences as people. And being mindful of the collective we is grounding, and each person's experiences are very important. And that kind of wraps up our little short stories from the stacks this time. See you next time.
Well, that is it for another show. And that's our final show of the fall semester. And next week, y'all, is Thanksgiving.
Oh,
How is that possible? Hello, Turkey.
Gobble, gobble.
It's the start of the holiday season. So we wish all of you out there a wonderful season of holidays, whichever ones you celebrate. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2022.
Yeah.